Egypt, land of eternal kings. The river of life. At the northeastern edge of Africa, where desert dominates the horizon, a narrow ribbon of blue brings life to the sands. The Nile River. Each year, its waters rose and fell with perfect rhythm, flooding the land, renewing the soil, and sustaining one of the longest-lasting civilizations in human history. For more than 3,000 years, Egypt flourished along its banks, not by chance, but by harmony with nature itself. A civilization born of the Nile. The Nile was more than a river. It was a god, a calendar, a highway, a promise of rebirth. Villages grew into cities, cities into kingdoms, and kingdoms into an empire that would outlast nearly all others. Here, order rose from chaos. Here, time itself was measured not in years, but in eternities. Pharaohs, gods among men. Egypt's rulers were not merely kings, they were pharaohs, living gods on earth, the embodiment of Ma'at, cosmic balance, truth, and order. The pharaoh ruled the land, commanded the armies, controlled the floods, and stood as the bridge between humanity and the divine. To obey the pharaoh was not politics, it was religion. Monuments against oblivion. To ensure eternal life, Egypt's kings built monuments not of wood, but of stone. The pyramids of the Old Kingdom rose like artificial mountains designed to lift the soul toward the stars. Centuries later, the temples of Karnak and Luxor glorified gods and kings alike. And deep within the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, pharaohs prepared for the afterlife in hidden tombs filled with gold, spells, and sacred texts. These were not graves, they were gateways to eternity. Ancient, even to the ancients. By the time Greek philosophers arrived, Egypt was already ancient. Herodotus called it the gift of the Nile. Plato believed its priests guarded lost knowledge from before the flood. Romans stood in awe of monuments older than their own civilization. Medieval Arab scholars spoke of the pyramids as vaults of secret wisdom. And today, modern archaeologists use satellites, ground-penetrating radar, and CT scans to uncover what still lies hidden beneath the sands. Egypt continues to whisper secrets across 5,000 years. Geography of destiny. Egypt's power was shaped by its land. To the south, towering cliffs and dangerous cataracts guarded its borders. To the west, vast deserts formed natural walls. To the east, mountains rich in copper, turquoise, and gold. To the north, the Mediterranean Sea opened Egypt to trade, diplomacy, and empire. Protected, prosperous, and isolated, Egypt grew stable where others fell. The two lands made one. Egypt was divided, yet united. Upper Egypt in the south, Lower Egypt in the north. The Pharaoh was the lord of the two lands, binding them together as one eternal kingdom. This unification was sacred, symbolized in art, ritual, and ideology. Order over chaos, unity over division, life over death. Questions that still haunt us. But who were these kings, really? How did they convince millions they were divine? What rituals prepared them for immortality? What truths still lie sealed behind stone doors and unbroken seals? And why, after 5 millennia, do their faces, names, and monuments still dominate our imagination? The dawn of kingship. Our journey begins not with pyramids, but earlier, at the dawn of kingship itself, at a sacred burial ground where Egypt's first rulers prepared for eternity, where history becomes legend, where gods and kings were born. Birth of kingship, the first pharaohs at Abydos. The sacred desert of beginnings. More than 1,000 years before the pyramids of Giza pierced the sky, Egypt's first kings were buried here, at Abydos. A silent plateau at the edge of the desert, wind-carved sand, scattered tombs barely rising above the earth. At first glance, it seems unremarkable. But beneath these sands lies the birthplace of kingship itself. A necropolis older than empire. Abydos predates Egypt's most famous monuments. It is older than Saqqara, older than Karnak, older than Luxor. Here, the earliest pharaohs were laid to rest in tombs of mud brick, timber, and reed, not stone. These were not monuments meant to impress the living. They were statements meant for the gods. The unification of Egypt. Around 3100 BCE, a revolution occurred. For the first time in human history, 2 large regions, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt, were unified under a single ruler. His name is debated, Narmer, or perhaps Menes, but his achievement is beyond dispute. He created the world's first territorial nation-state, a kingdom defined not by a city, but by land, borders, and ideology. The Narmer Palette. Power in stone. This moment survives in stone. The Narmer Palette shows a king wearing the white crown of Upper Egypt on one side and the red crown of Lower Egypt on the other. He smites enemies. He dominates chaos. He stands larger than all others. This is not mere propaganda. It is theology. Kingship is presented as cosmic order made flesh. The pharaoh as cosmic guardian. From the very beginning, the pharaoh was more than a ruler. He was the living embodiment of Ma'at, balance, truth, harmony. His duty was to keep the Nile flooding, the sun rising, the universe stable. To rebel against the pharaoh was not treason, it was sacrilege. Abydos and the god of the dead. Abydos was sacred long before kings arrived. It was believed to be connected to Osiris, god of the underworld and resurrection. By burying themselves near Osiris's cult center, early pharaohs linked their fate to the god who died and lived again. In death, the king did not vanish. He became divine. Ritual enclosures, the first royal architecture. Near the tombs rose massive ceremonial enclosures like Shunet el-Zabib. High mud brick walls enclosed sacred spaces where rituals were performed, royal jubilees, symbolic renewals of power, ceremonies binding king, gods, and land. These structures were not tombs. They were stages for kingship. Many scholars believe they were prototypes, early ancestors of the pyramid complexes yet to come. The birth of writing. Kingship demanded memory, and memory demanded writing. Here at Abydos appear some of the earliest hieroglyphs ever written. Ivory tags, inked jar labels, carved symbols naming kings, offerings, victories. Writing was not invented for poetry or philosophy. It was invented to preserve royal authority beyond death. Wealth, flood, and power. Each year the Nile flooded. Fields turned black with fertile silt. Harvests multiplied, surplus grew. That surplus fed armies, priests, scribes, and builders. The pharaoh's power became visible, measurable, and permanent. And from Abydos, the blueprint of Egyptian kingship spread, down the Nile, across centuries, into eternity. The shadow that stretched for millennia. Everything that followed, pyramids, temples, divine kings, began here, in simple tombs beneath desert sand. Before stone touched the sky, Egypt learned how to make a king eternal. Ma'at, philosophy of order and cosmic rule. The rising sun. As the sun rose each morning over Egypt's deserts, it did more than bring light. It confirmed that the universe was still in balance. For the ancient Egyptians, this balance had a name, Ma'at, the law that governed everything. Ma'at was not a god alone. It was a principle, the invisible force that held the cosmos together. Ma'at meant order, truth, justice, balance, and harmony. It governed the stars in the sky, the flood of the Nile, the turning of seasons, the cycle of birth, life, death, and rebirth. Without Ma'at, the world would fall back into chaos, into Isfet, the primeval disorder that existed before creation. Ma'at and creation. Egyptian myths taught that the universe emerged from chaos through Ma'at. The sun god, Ra, rose from the primordial waters, bringing light and order into existence. Each sunrise was not guaranteed. It was a victory, and it had to be won every day. The Pharaoh, guardian of cosmic balance. This sacred responsibility fell to one figure alone, the Pharaoh. Egyptian kings did not rule merely by force or heredity. They ruled because they were the living agents of Ma'at. The pharaoh's primary duty was not conquest, not administration, but cosmic maintenance. If the Nile failed to flood, if famine struck, if chaos spread, it was believed Ma'at had been violated, and the pharaoh would be held accountable. Rituals that held the universe together. Every day, in temples across Egypt, priests reenacted creation itself. Statues of the gods were washed, clothed, fed, and offered incense. These rituals were not symbolic, they were essential. Through them, the pharaoh, often represented by priests, renewed Ma'at and sustained existence itself. Festivals, processions, and offerings reaffirmed the bond between king, gods, and people. The 5 names of a king. Each pharaoh carried 5 royal names, each revealing an aspect of his cosmic role. One bound him to Horus, god of kingship. Another proclaimed him the son of Ra, the sun god. One declared him lord of the two lands, unifier of Upper and Lower Egypt. These were not titles, they were theological statements. The pharaoh was human, but also divine. The Sed Festival, renewing power. Time weakened even divine kings. To prove vitality and divine favor, pharaohs celebrated the Sed Festival, a ritual of rejuvenation. The king ran symbolic races, wore ancient crowns, performed sacred rites. Through this ceremony, his power was renewed, his right to rule reaffirmed, his bond with Ma'at restored. Kingship was not assumed, it had to be earned again and again. Ma'at in daily life. Ma'at did not belong only to kings. It shaped all of Egyptian society. Judges swore to uphold Ma'at in courts of law. Scribes recorded grain with fairness and precision. Farmers trusted Ma'at to bring the flood on time. To live rightly was to live in accordance with Ma'at. To lie, cheat, or rebel was to invite cosmic disorder. Ma'at and the afterlife. Even in death, Ma'at ruled. In the hall of judgment, the heart of the deceased was weighed against the feather of Ma'at. A light heart meant truth and balance. A heavy heart meant sin and chaos. Only those aligned with Ma'at could pass into eternity. Even pharaohs were not exempt. The axis of the world. Unlike many ancient kings, the pharaoh was not merely a conqueror. He was the axis between heaven and earth. As long as he upheld Ma'at, Egypt prospered, and for more than 3,000 years it did. Because Egypt was not ruled by fear alone, it was ruled by the belief that order itself could be preserved. Building eternity. Pyramids, temples, and divine architecture. Stone against time. If a king was divine in life, then in death his divinity had to be secured. Not for years, not for generations, but for eternity. And no civilization ever pursued eternity with greater determination than ancient Egypt. The pyramid idea. The pyramids were not simply tombs. They were resurrection machines. Their shape, rising from earth to sky, mirrored the Benben, the primordial mound of creation from which the sun first rose. Each pyramid was a frozen sunrise, a ladder of stone for the soul of a god-king. The Age of Pyramid Builders. During the Old Kingdom's fourth dynasty, Egypt reached an architectural zenith. At Giza, 3 pharaohs, Khufu, Khafre, and Menkaure, constructed the most ambitious stone monuments the world had ever seen. The Great Pyramid of Khufu once stood over 146 meters high. It was aligned to true north with astonishing precision, less than a fraction of a degree off. Its sides mirrored the cardinal points. Its passages echoed the path of the sun. Its internal chambers aligned with circumpolar stars, the so-called imperishable ones. These were not accidents, they were cosmic calculations. Inside the pyramid. Within the pyramid, narrow corridors rose and fell through darkness. The king's chamber, lined with granite, housed a sarcophagus carved from a single block of stone. Above it, massive relieving chambers absorbed the pyramid's crushing weight, an engineering solution unmatched for millennia. The goal was singular: to protect the king's body, to preserve his name, to guide his soul to the heavens. Who built the pyramids? For centuries, myth claimed slaves built the pyramids. Archaeology tells a different story. Excavations near Giza reveal a planned workers' city. Bakeries, medical facilities, sleeping quarters, and cemeteries. This was a national project. Farmers worked during the Nile flood season. Skilled masons cut and placed stone. Architects, scribes, and overseers coordinated labor on a massive scale. Workers were fed, paid, honored, and buried near the monuments they helped create. The pyramids were built not by chains, but by belief and organization. The Great Sphinx. Nearby, carved from living bedrock, the Great Sphinx gazed east toward the rising sun. Half lion, half king, a guardian of sacred space. Its face, likely that of Pharaoh Khafre, symbolized royal power harnessed to cosmic order. Even erosion could not erase its message. From pyramids to temples. As centuries passed, royal architecture evolved. Kings no longer built colossal pyramids, but they built something just as powerful: temples. Unlike tombs, temples were not houses for the dead. They were houses for the gods. The cosmic temples. At Karnak, priests expanded a sacred complex for nearly 2,000 years. Its hypostyle hall, supported by 134 colossal columns, created a forest of stone, dwarfing all who entered. At Luxor, processional avenues linked temples to festivals that renewed royal power. At Abu Simbel, Ramesses II carved his image directly into a mountain, 4 colossal statues staring across Nubia. Twice a year, sunlight penetrates the temple's depths to illuminate the seated gods within. Architecture had become astronomy. Stone had learned to obey the sun. Temples as cosmic machines. Temples were not places of public worship. Ordinary Egyptians prayed at household shrines. Temples were restricted zones operated by priests on behalf of the pharaoh. Each day, rituals fed the gods, clothed them, awakened them, and renewed Maat. These ceremonies were believed to keep the universe functioning. If ritual failed, chaos might follow. Writing for eternity. Tombs and temples were covered in words. Not decoration, but instructions. The pyramid texts carved inside royal tombs were spells to help the king ascend to the sky. Later, the coffin texts extended this knowledge to nobles. Eventually, the Book of the Dead offered guidance for all who could afford it, maps of the afterlife, passwords, and protections. In Egypt, to be remembered was to live again, and stone was the most reliable memory ever invented. Theology in stone. Every wall, axis, doorway, and shadow carried meaning. Architecture was not art alone. It was belief made permanent. a civilization that refused to accept oblivion and instead carved eternity itself. Symbols of divinity, regalia, crowns, and the false beard. Power made visible. In ancient Egypt, divinity was not abstract. It was worn, held, displayed. Royal authority did not rely on speeches or decrees. It spoke through symbols, objects so potent that even a silent statue could command obedience. To see the pharaoh fully adorned was to see a god made visible. The language of regalia. Egyptian regalia formed a sacred visual language. Every crown, every staff, every ornament carried layered meaning, political, cosmic, and divine. These were not decorations. They were identifiers of sacred office. The crowns of Egypt. The earliest symbol of kingship was the white crown, the hijet, tall and luminous. It represented Upper Egypt, the land of cliffs, deserts, and the Nile's source. Opposite it stood the red crown, the deshret, flat, spiraled, and wide revealing. It symbolized Lower Egypt, the fertile delta, open to the Mediterranean and foreign trade. When Egypt was unified, the two crowns merged into one, the pshent, the double crown. This was more than a political emblem. It was proof that the pharaoh ruled the two lands as one cosmic order. The blue crown, power in action. Later, a new crown appeared, the blue crown, or kepresh. Often misnamed a war crown, it was worn not only in battle, but in rituals of renewal. Its color evoked the heavens. Its shape emphasized authority in motion. This was the pharaoh as commander, judge, and protector, Ma'at enforced through strength. The false beard, mark of godhood. Perhaps the most striking symbol of all was the false beard. Unlike natural beards, this ceremonial piece was braided, rigid, and artificial. It was worn by kings and queens. Hatshepsut, Egypt's female pharaoh, wore it proudly. Why? Because the beard did not represent masculinity. It represented divinity. Its elongated form echoed the rays of the sun descending to earth, linking the pharaoh to Ra, the solar god. In death, the beard curved upward, signaling transformation into Osiris, lord of the afterlife. The crook and the flail. Across statues, reliefs, and sarcophagi, pharaohs are shown holding two ancient tools. The crook, once used by shepherds, symbolized guidance, care, and protection. The flail, associated with threshing grain, represented authority, discipline, and punishment. Together, they defined the dual nature of kingship. The pharaoh nurtures, the pharaoh commands. Mercy and force balanced in one divine ruler. The uraeus, living fire. At the brow of the crown rose the uraeus, a rearing cobra frozen mid-strike. This serpent was not symbolic alone. It was believed to be alive with divine power. Legends claimed the uraeus could spit fire at enemies, annihilating threats before they reached the king. It was the goddess Wadjet, guardian of Lower Egypt, forever vigilant. To stand before a pharaoh was to face a king protected by living gods. Names, Titles and sacred identity. Regalia did not stand alone. It was paired with titles, 5 royal names carved into stone and spoken in ritual. Each name expressed a different aspect of divine kingship. Falcon of Horus, chosen of Ra, Lord of the 2 lands. Together, regalia and language formed a complete sacred identity. Symbols that ruled a civilization. To modern eyes, these objects may appear ceremonial. To ancient Egyptians, they were proof. Proof that the pharaoh was not merely human. Proof that the gods ruled through him. Proof that order would endure. In Egypt, power was not argued, it was seen. Faces of power. Art, anatomy, and royal portraiture. Art as authority. Egyptian art was never meant to capture a moment. It was designed to freeze eternity. Every statue, relief, and painted wall followed rules, rules older than dynasties themselves. These images were not portraits in the modern sense. They were statements of power, encoded in stone. To change the image of the king was to risk destabilizing the cosmos itself. The Middle Kingdom turn. Yet in the Middle Kingdom, something unusual appeared. Kings began to look tired. The statues of Senusret III break sharply from idealized youth. His face is heavy-lidded, his brow furrowed, his mouth tight, almost grim. This was not decay, it was intention. The king who hears everything. Senusret's most striking feature is his ears, large, prominent, exaggerated. Modern observers once speculated about disease, but Egyptologists see something else. This was royal propaganda. The king who hears petitions, the king who listens to gods and men alike, the king who never sleeps. In an age of internal unrest and frontier wars, vigilance became a virtue, and it was carved into stone. The canon of perfection. Still, most royal imagery remained timeless. Pharaohs are shown eternally youthful, broad-shouldered, narrow-waisted, muscles taut, faces serene. They stride forward, they strike enemies, they never falter. This was not vanity, it was cosmic necessity. A weak image of the king implied a weak Ma'at, an unstable universe. Art was theology. Seeing behind the mask. For millennia, these idealized faces were all we had. Today, science allows us to look deeper. CT scanners peer through wrappings without disturbing them. Photogrammetry captures every contour of bone. DNA analysis traces family traits across generations. The God King becomes human again. Amenhotep III, Serenity and Suffering. Amenhotep III ruled at the height of Egypt's wealth. His statues show calm perfection, full lips, heavy eyes, effortless authority. But CT scans reveal arthritis, dental disease, and physical pain. Behind the serene smile was a man enduring the weight of decades on the throne. Ramesses II, time itself made visible. No king illustrates time better than Ramesses II. He ruled for 67 years, long enough to become a legend in his own lifetime. Reconstructions show him at 45, powerful, commanding, unmistakably dominant. At 90, the same face remains, but softened by age, marked by endurance. The God-King did not escape time. He outlived it. Gods with human bones. Modern reconstructions reveal fractures, infections, genetic conditions. They expose family resemblances, fathers and sons carved differently by artists, yet shaped by the same blood. These discoveries do not diminish Egypt's kings, they deepen them. They remind us that divinity was worn like a crown, while beneath it beat a human heart. The final paradox. Egyptian art shows us what kings were meant to be. Science shows us what they were. Between the two lies the truth of power itself. Empire and warfare, warrior pharaohs and global power. The pharaoh as warlord. Pharaohs were not only priests, judges, and builders. They were warriors. From the moment Egypt unified, violence and diplomacy became tools of survival. Borders had to be defended, trade routes secured, rivals crushed or contained. To rule Egypt was to command its armies. The rise of imperial Egypt. By the new kingdom, Egypt transformed from a regional kingdom into an imperial power. Standing armies replaced seasonal levies. Professional officers emerged. Chariots, fast, deadly, and symbolic, became instruments of terror. War was no longer reactive, it was strategic. Thutmose III, master of campaigns. No king embodied this transformation more than Thutmose III. Often called the Napoleon of Egypt, he led at least 17 military campaigns into Canaan and Syria. His enemies were city-states, coalitions, and rival kings, each testing Egypt's reach. At Megiddo, Thutmose gambled everything, leading his army through a narrow pass to surprise a larger enemy force. The victory was decisive. Egypt emerged as the dominant power of the Eastern Mediterranean. Empire built on tribute. After conquest came control. Gold from Nubia, timber from Lebanon, copper from Cyprus, captives pressed into labor. Tribute flowed into Egypt's temples and treasuries, funding monuments, priesthoods, and royal propaganda. The empire paid for itself. A world of great powers. But Egypt was not alone. To the north rose the Hittite Empire, organized, militarized, and equally ambitious. Two superpowers now faced each other across the Levant. Collision was inevitable. Ramesses II and Kadesh. Under Ramesses II, Egypt marched north once more. At Kadesh, Egyptian and Hittite forces collided in one of the largest chariot battles in history. Thousands of horses thundered across the plain, bronze weapons flashed, commanders struggled to control chaos. Ramesses claimed victory, but the truth was more complex. Kadesh ended in stalemate. The First Peace Treaty. What followed was revolutionary.
Instead of endless war, Egypt and the Hittites chose diplomacy. They signed the earliest known peace treaty in human history. Its terms survive today, carved in hieroglyphs in Egypt and written in cuneiform in Anatolia. Former enemies became allies. War gave way to balance.
Diplomacy as power. Egyptian pharaohs mastered diplomacy as skillfully as warfare. Letters crossed deserts and seas. Princesses became queens. Gold flowed as gifts and leverage. At court, foreign rulers bowed before the living god-king of the Nile. Egypt stood at the center of an international system. The cost of empire. Yet empire carried a price. Armies demanded resources. Vassals demanded attention. Borders stretched thin. By the late 18th and 19th dynasties, Egypt controlled vast territories, but maintaining them required constant vigilance. Power had peaked, and new storms gathered on the horizon. Akhenaten, heretic of the sun disk, a king against eternity. At the height of Egypt's power, when its gods seemed as eternal as stone, one ruler dared to challenge them all. His name was Akhenaten, and his revolution would shake the foundations of divine kingship itself. The Aten rises. Akhenaten rejected the ancient pantheon, Amun, Osiris, Ptah, and 1,000 local gods. In their place, he elevated a single force, the Aten. Not a god with human form, not a being who spoke through priests, but a sun disk radiating life through beams of light that ended in human hands. The Aten was everywhere and nowhere. Religion as politics. This was not only theology, it was political warfare. For centuries, the priesthood of Amun at Thebes had grown immensely powerful, controlling land, wealth, and labor on a scale rivaling the throne itself. Akhenaten moved swiftly. Temples were closed, offerings halted, priests dismissed. Their wealth was seized and redirected to the new cult of the Aten. The economy trembled. Egypt's largest employers, its temples, fell silent. A new capital for a new god. Akhenaten abandoned Thebes entirely. He founded a new city in the desert, Akhetaten, horizon of the Aten. Built almost overnight, it was a city without shadows. Temples had no roofs. Altars stood open to the sky. Nothing stood between the sun disk and its worshippers. This was a radical break from Egypt's sacred past. Nefertiti, queen as divine partner. At Akhenaten's side stood Nefertiti. She was not shown as a passive consort. She wore crowns. She smote enemies. She received the Aten's rays directly, just as the king did. In art, she appears as co-sovereign, perhaps even ruler in her own right. Power was no longer inherited only through blood. It was shared through light. A family at the center of cosmos. For the first time in Egyptian history, the royal family became the center of religious imagery. Akhenaten kisses his daughters. Nefertiti cradles infants. Children play beneath the Aten's rays. These were not private moments. They were theology. The royal family was the sole conduit between humanity and the divine. The Amarna Art Revolution. This belief transformed art. The rigid canon of idealized kingship was shattered. Akhenaten is shown with elongated limbs, narrow shoulders, wide hips, and soft bellies. Faces are delicate, bodies are vulnerable. Emotion replaces timeless perfection. This was not realism for its own sake. It was ideology made flesh. A new cosmos required a new image of the king. Empire unravels. But while Akhenaten looked inward, the world beyond Egypt burned. In cuneiform letters, the Amarna letters, vassal kings begged for help. Cities fell, borders collapsed, enemies advanced. Egypt's armies were absent. Faith had replaced force. The fall of the Aten. When Akhenaten died, the revolution collapsed with stunning speed. Akhenaten was abandoned. Temples to the Aten were dismantled. The old gods returned. His son, once named Tutankhaten, changed his name to Tutankhamun. The Aten was erased. Damned from memory. Akhenaten suffered a fate worse than death. His images were smashed. His name was chiseled from stone. He was omitted from king lists. Egypt attempted to forget him. And yet, his heresy remains one of the most daring experiments in human history, a moment when a single man tried to remake the universe itself. Women who wore the double crown, a throne reserved for men. Egyptian kingship was forged in masculinity. The pharaoh was warrior, high priest, and divine son, a living embodiment of cosmic order, Ma'at. And yet, at moments of crisis, women ruled Egypt as pharaoh, wearing the sacred double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. Not as queens behind the throne, but as kings in their own right. Sobekneferu, the first confirmed female pharaoh. The earliest confirmed woman to rule as pharaoh was Sobekneferu at the end of the Middle Kingdom. When Amenemhat IV died without a clear male heir, Egypt stood at a crossroads. Sobekneferu stepped forward. She adopted the full royal titulary, 5 names, divine epithets, and kingly authority. Her statues reveal the tension of her reign. She wears the Nemes headdress and royal kilt, yet her female form remains visible. She did not disguise herself as a man. She ruled as a woman who was king. Her reign was brief but decisive. She preserved stability, then vanished from history as the Middle Kingdom itself collapsed. Hatshepsut, the master of legitimacy. Centuries later, Egypt would witness the most successful female pharaoh of all. Hatshepsut began as regent to a child king, Thutmose III, but regency was not enough. Step by step, she transformed her role. Titles changed, imagery shifted, power consolidated. She crowned herself pharaoh, becoming king. Hatshepsut understood that legitimacy in Egypt was visual and divine. She adopted male regalia, the false beard, broad chest, and muscular torso. In reliefs, her body became male. In inscriptions, pronouns shifted.
She commissioned a divine birth narrative, claiming the god Amun himself had fathered her. Her rule was not justified by force. It was justified by order, prosperity, and piety. Trade flourished, monuments rose, Egypt was at peace. For over 20 years, Hatshepsut ruled as pharaoh, and Egypt thrived.
Erasure after death. After her death, her images were attacked. Names chiseled out, statues smashed, reliefs recarved. Not because she failed, but because she succeeded too well. Tau Sert, power in a fractured age. In the final years of the 19th dynasty, Egypt stood on the edge of collapse. Civil war loomed, generals schemed, the throne weakened. In this chaos emerged Tau Sert. Widow of Seti II, she ruled first as co-regent, then as pharaoh. Her reign was defensive, precarious, and contested. Unlike Hatshepsut, Tau Sert ruled not from strength, but necessity. Her monuments show a kingdom stretched thin, where queens, priests, and military leaders struggled to hold the state together. Her fall marked the end of a dynasty. Power behind the throne. Most powerful women never wore the crown, but they shaped Egypt's fate all the same. The title, God's Wife of Amun, granted immense religious authority, land, and wealth. These women controlled temples, influenced kings, and anchored dynasties. Great royal wives acted as regents, diplomats, and succession brokers. When kings were weak or absent, women preserved continuity. Adapting ideology. As women claimed authority, Egypt's rigid ideology adapted. Female kings appeared with male bodies. Grammar bent. Titles blurred. The system did not collapse. It adjusted. Egyptian kingship was not broken by women. It was proven resilient. The double crown was never meant for them, yet they wore it, and Egypt endured. Tutankhamun, Treasures of the Golden Boy. A king without great deeds. In life, Tutankhamun was a minor king. He commanded no vast conquests. He built no colossal temples. He ruled for barely a decade. Yet in death he became the most famous pharaoh on earth. Not because of his power, but because history forgot him. Child of a broken revolution. Tutankhamun was born into the final unstable years of the Amarna Age. His father, almost certainly Akhenaten, had shattered Egypt's religious system, elevating the Aten and dismantling the ancient priesthoods. When the boy ascended the throne at around 9 years old, Egypt was fractured. The old gods were silent. Temples stood closed. Priests were impoverished. Tradition lay in ruins. Tutankhamun did not rule alone. Power rested with Ai, a senior courtier, and Horemheb, a general who would one day become pharaoh himself. Restoring the old gods. Early in his reign, the boy king reversed the Amarna experiment. He abandoned the Aten, reopened the temples, restored Amun, Ptah, and the ancient gods. And he changed his name from Tutankhaten, living image of the Aten, to Tutankhamun,
living image of Amun. It was a political declaration carved into stone. Egypt was returning to order.
A short, fragile life. Tutankhamun never reached adulthood as a ruler. He walked with difficulty. He relied on canes. His body bore the marks of genetic inheritance shaped by generations of royal inbreeding. Around the age of 19, he died, quietly, unexpectedly, without an heir. His burial was rushed, and then he vanished.
The tomb that time forgot. For more than 3,000 years, Tutankhamun's tomb lay hidden beneath rubble in the Valley of the Kings. Other tombs were robbed, gold stripped, mummies desecrated. But Tutankhamun was spared, protected by chance and obscurity. Then, in 1922, archaeologist Howard Carter uncovered a hidden staircase. At its base, a sealed door. When Carter peered inside by candlelight, he was asked what he saw. His reply became legend. Yes, wonderful things.
Gold in the darkness. Tutankhamun's burial chamber was a time capsule. 4 nested gilded shrines encased a quartzite sarcophagus. Inside, 3 coffins, 1 solid gold, and within them the king himself. Around him lay over 5,000 objects, chariots for eternity, thrones inlaid with gold and faience, alabaster vessels for sacred oils, gaming boards for leisure in the afterlife, ritual statues to guard the body. Every object had purpose. Nothing was random. The golden mask. At the heart of the tomb lay the golden funerary mask, 11 kilograms of gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, obsidian, carnelian, and turquoise. The face is serene, eternal, divine. It is not a portrait of death. It is a declaration of rebirth. The curse that captured the world. As members of the excavation team died in subsequent years, newspapers created a legend, the Curse of the Pharaoh. Tales of vengeance, ancient spells, supernatural retribution. In truth, most participants lived long lives. The curse was not ancient magic. It was modern media. Science and the Boy King. Early X-rays in the 1960s suggested a fractured skull. Whispers of murder spread. But in the 21st century, CT scans and DNA analysis told a different story. No fatal cranial trauma, no evidence of assassination. Instead, a severe fracture of the femur, likely from a fall or accident. Signs of infection, evidence of malaria, congenital conditions linked to royal inbreeding. Tutankhamun was not murdered. He was fragile. A boy born into divinity, but not strength. Immortality through discovery. Tutankhamun died young. He ruled briefly. He was nearly forgotten. Yet today, his face is the most recognized in ancient history. Not because of what he achieved, but because his tomb remained sealed. The boy king died quietly, but his treasures made him eternal. Mummies, tombs, and the science of the afterlife. Death as transformation. To the ancient Egyptians, death was not an ending. It was a threshold. a dangerous passage from the world of the living into a perfected, eternal state, if one survived the journey. Eternity was not guaranteed. It had to be engineered.
The fragmented soul. The Egyptian human being was not a single entity, but a constellation of parts. The Ka, the vital life force, sustained by offerings. The Ba, the mobile soul, able to leave the tomb and return. The Ak, the luminous, transfigured spirit, born only after successful judgment. The Ren, the name, to erase it was to annihilate existence itself. The Shayut, the shadow, inseparable from the person. If any component failed, eternity collapsed. Preservation was survival.
Words against oblivion. To guide the dead, Egyptians developed funerary texts, instruction manuals for eternity. The earliest were the pyramid texts, carved into royal tomb walls, exclusive spells for kings. Later, the coffin texts extended protection to nobles. And finally, the most famous of all, the Book of the Dead, a customizable collection of spells, hymns, and declarations. They instructed the deceased how to navigate gates guarded by demons, speak secret names, avoid annihilation, justify their life before Osiris. The most critical moment came at judgment. The art of mummification. The body, the anchor of the soul, had to endure forever. Embalmers began their work immediately. The brain was liquefied and removed through the nose. Internal organs were extracted, dried, and preserved. The body was dehydrated with natron salt for 40 days. Skin shrank, flesh hardened. The corpse became timeless. The organs were stored in canopic jars, protected by the 4 sons of Horus. Imseti, liver. Hapi, lungs. Dwamutef, stomach. Quebecsinuef, intestines. Every step followed sacred protocol. Amulets, linen, and magic. The body was wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen, layer by layer. Between the wrappings, priests placed amulets. The Jed pillar for stability, the Wedjat eye for healing, the Isis knot for protection, the scarab for rebirth. Each had a precise location. Each activated a spell. A funerary mask, often gilded, sealed identity. The face must remain recognizable for eternity. Servants for the next world. Death did not end labor. To avoid eternal toil, the dead were buried with Shabti figures, small servant statues. When commanded, they would answer, "Here I am." Even in paradise, hierarchy endured. Tombs as defense systems. To protect the body, architecture evolved. Pyramids proved too visible, too tempting. So Egypt turned inward. The Valley of the Kings hid tombs beneath cliffs, carving them deep into stone. Corridors descended through darkness. False doors misled intruders. Sealed chambers hid sarcophagi. Curses threatened divine punishment. Yet almost all were breached. Gold invited violation. Science enters the tomb. Today, priests no longer guard the dead. Scientists do. CT scanners replace ritual. DNA sequencing replaces genealogy. Microscopes replace spells. Modern imaging reveals bone fractures, arthritis, dental disease, vascular calcification, embalming techniques, resin recipes. Mummies speak again, not through incantation, but evidence.
The body remembers. Science has uncovered lives once hidden by gold and linen. Pharaohs who limped, queens who bore many children, kings who died of infection, not violence. Religion promised eternity. Science explains the cost.
Two paths to immortality. The ancient Egyptians sought eternity through ritual. We seek truth through technology. Both ask the same question: what survives death? Here, theology and science do not compete. They complete each other. Identifying the pharaohs. DNA, CT, and forensic challenges. The problem of nameless kings. Not every royal mummy carries a name. Time erased identities long before science arrived. Tomb robberies stripped gold and labels. Priests moved bodies to protect them. Coffins were reused. Royal caches mixed kings and queens from different dynasties. By the late New Kingdom, even Egyptians themselves no longer knew who lay where. History fractured. Royal hiding places. During periods of instability, priests reburied kings in secret caches. DB 320 at Deir el-Bahari, KV 35 in the Valley of the Kings. Here, dozens of royal mummies were stacked together like refugees of eternity. Some were wrapped hastily. Some bore rewritten labels. Some carried names that did not match the bodies inside. Scholars were left with an impossible question: which king is this? Science enters the royal dead. In the 21st century, the investigation changed. DNA sequencing, high-resolution CT scanning, forensic anthropology. The dead were no longer silent. Tutankhamun's family tree. DNA analysis finally clarified one of Egypt's greatest mysteries. Tutankhamun's parents were siblings, children of Amenhotep III and Queen Tai. The controversial mummy from KV 55, long debated by Egyptologists, proved genetically linked as Tutankhamun's father, most likely Akhenaten himself. Royal incest was no rumor, it was policy, and it came with consequences. The price of divine blood. Genetic testing revealed deformities and illnesses once hidden beneath gold. Tutankhamun suffered from bone necrosis, malaria, and structural weakness. Royal divinity had a biological cost. Violence written in bone. Other mummies told darker stories. Second Enre-Ta, ruler of Thebes during the Hyksos Wars, bore horrifying wounds. Axe strikes to the skull, dagger punctures, blunt force trauma. CT scans showed his hands positioned as if bound. This was not ceremonial death. This was execution on a battlefield, or assassination after capture. Egypt's war of liberation had claimed its king. A murder confirmed. For centuries, ancient texts described a palace coup against Ramesses III,
the infamous harem conspiracy, but evidence was incomplete until CT scans revealed a deep, fatal incision across the king's throat, hidden beneath linen and amulets. The wound was lethal. The conspiracy was real. In death, Ramesses III confirmed what papyri only implied.
Forensic limits. Yet certainty remains elusive. DNA degrades. Contamination threatens results. Royal lineages intermarried too closely for easy distinction. Caches confuse chronology. Labels lie or were written centuries later. Science solves much, but not everything. History reassembled. Each scan restores a fragment of truth. Each genetic strand reconnects broken dynasties. Each forensic insight pulls Egypt's rulers from myth toward history. They ruled as gods. They died as humans. And now, after 5,000 years, they are finally being identified. Pharaoh of the Exodus, kings in biblical memory, the question that never fades. One question has echoed across centuries of faith, scholarship, and debate. Who was the Pharaoh of the Exodus? The story of oppression, plagues, escape, and divine judgment stands at the heart of biblical tradition. Yet in Egyptian history, no such event is clearly recorded. Between scripture and stone lies silence. The contenders. Several Egyptian kings have been proposed. Thutmose III, the great warrior of the 18th dynasty, ruled during a period of expansion and military dominance. Some argue his reign aligns with early biblical chronologies, placing the Exodus in the 15th century BCE. Others point to Ramesses II, builder of the vast delta capital P-Ramesses. The Book of Exodus names the city of Ramesses, and his reign coincides with large-scale construction projects requiring immense labor forces. Still others look further back, to the chaotic era of the Hyksos, foreign rulers who once controlled the Nile Delta before being expelled by native Egyptian kings. Some theories suggest the Exodus preserves distant memory of this upheaval, later transformed into religious narrative. Each theory fits some evidence and contradicts others. Egypt's silence. What Egypt does not record is as important as what it does. Egyptian inscriptions celebrated order, victory, and divine favor. Kings did not document humiliation, disaster, or divine punishment. To acknowledge plagues, slave revolts, or the death of a firstborn heir would be to admit a failure of Ma'at, the cosmic balance the pharaoh was sworn to uphold. History in Egypt was propaganda carved in stone. Defeat was erased. Archaeology and absence. Archaeologists have searched for material traces. Mass migration layers, destroyed cities, sudden demographic shifts. But nomadic groups leave little behind. Camps vanish. Oral traditions outlast pottery. Absence is not proof of fiction, but neither is belief proof of history. Scripture and memory. The Exodus narrative was not written as a court record. It was written as identity. For ancient Israel, Egypt represented bondage, escape, meant divine election. The story defined a people, their laws, their God, and their destiny. Memory shaped meaning. Meaning shaped history. Diverging chronologies. Biblical chronologies differ between texts. Egyptian king lists compress or expand reigns. Radiocarbon dating introduces margins of error. Each discipline speaks its own language, and translation between them is never exact. The pharaoh as symbol. Over time, the pharaoh of the Exodus became more than a man. He became the archetype of tyranny, the ruler who defies divine will and pays the price. In this sense, the question, "Who was the pharaoh?" may miss the deeper point. The story was never meant to preserve his name, only his downfall. History meets faith. The Exodus sits at a boundary no tool can fully cross. Archaeology seeks evidence. History seeks context. Theology seeks meaning. None cancels the other. An unanswered question. The pharaoh of the Exodus remains unnamed, not because history has failed, but because memory serves different masters. Stone remembers power. Scripture remembers liberation. And between them, the Nile continues to flow, silent witness to both. Egypt after the Pharaohs, Greeks, Romans, and medieval Arabs. The silence of the Pharaohs. The voices of the Pharaohs faded. No new pyramids rose. No divine kings claimed the two lands. Yet Egypt did not vanish. It endured, absorbed, reinterpreted, and reborn under foreign rule. Alexander, conqueror, becomes pharaoh. In 332 BCE, Alexander the Great entered Egypt without resistance. To Egyptians, he was not merely a Macedonian conqueror. He was a liberator from Persian rule. In Memphis, he was crowned pharaoh in the ancient rites. He offered sacrifice to Egyptian gods. He honored their traditions. Alexander understood something crucial. To rule Egypt, one must become Egyptian. Before departing, he founded a city on the Mediterranean coast, Alexandria, destined to become the intellectual capital of the ancient world. The Ptolemies, Greek kings, Egyptian gods. After Alexander's death, Egypt fell to his general, Ptolemy. The Ptolemies ruled as Greek monarchs, but styled themselves as pharaohs. They appeared on temple walls in traditional regalia. They funded priesthoods. They upheld ancient rituals. Yet Egypt now spoke Greek. Alexandria housed the Great Library and the Museion, attracting scholars from across the Mediterranean. Mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and geography flourished. Egypt became the brain of the Hellenistic world. Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh. Cleopatra VII was the final ruler of this hybrid dynasty. She was not merely a lover of Roman generals. She was a strategist, linguist, and intellectual, fluent in Egyptian, Greek, Latin, and more. She presented herself as Isis incarnate, binding Greek monarchy to Egyptian theology. But Rome was rising. After alliances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony failed, Cleopatra faced the inevitable. In 30 BCE, Egypt became a Roman province. The age of pharaohs ended for good. Rome's granary.
To Rome, Egypt was not sacred. It was strategic. Its grain fed the empire. Its wealth filled imperial coffers. Roman emperors ruled Egypt directly, bypassing the Senate. Some adopted pharaonic titles. Others treated monuments as curiosities. Tourists carved graffiti into temples. Soldiers left names beside hieroglyphs. Shrines became museums. Egypt was ancient even to the ancients. Christian Egypt. By the 4th century, Egypt transformed again. Christianity spread rapidly. Temples closed. Pagan rituals faded. Monks withdrew into the desert, founding early Christian monasticism. Hieroglyphs fell silent. The old gods retreated into myth. The language of ancient Egypt survived only as Coptic, used in Christian liturgy. A civilization slept, its script unreadable. The Islamic encounter. In the 7th century, Arab armies entered Egypt. Unlike earlier conquerors, Islamic rulers encountered ruins already ancient. Medieval Arab scholars did not dismiss them. They studied them. They believed the pyramids held secret knowledge, astronomy, medicine, alchemy, lost sciences of the ancients. They associated Egyptian sages with Hermes Trismegistus, legendary source of wisdom. Egypt became part of Islamic intellectual history. Medieval Egyptology. Long before modern archaeology, Arab historians recorded inscriptions, described monuments, and compared scripts. Some speculated hieroglyphs were symbolic language, others believed them encoded science. Treasure hunters searched sealed chambers. Philosophers wrote of Egypt as humanity's first school. From Cairo to Baghdad to Cordoba, Egyptian lore circulated through manuscripts and mines. A land reimagined. Each age reinvented Egypt. To Greeks, ancient wisdom. To Romans, imperial resource. To Christians, a pagan past. To Muslims, a vault of hidden knowledge. Yet beneath every reinterpretation, the stones endured. Egypt was never forgotten, only translated. Decoding the Pharaohs. Modern archaeology, medicine, and meaning. From legend to laboratory. For centuries, the pharaohs were legends, half gods, half myths. Today, they are patients, scanned, measured, sequenced, reconstructed. Modern science has peeled back the linen wrappings of time, not with tomb robbers' tools, but with machines designed for the living. Seeing through time. CT scanners pass through mummified flesh without a single incision. Bones reveal age, posture, trauma. Teeth tell stories of diet and childhood stress. Calcified arteries whisper of heart disease. Digital reconstructions rebuild faces once erased by death. Cheekbones, noses, expressions shaped by ancestry and age. The pharaohs look back at us, not as gods, but as human beings. DNA, dynasties, and disease. Genetic testing has rewritten royal history. Family trees once guessed at through art and inscription now emerge through chromosomes. Royal incest, long debated, becomes measurable. Inherited disorders surface. Malaria scars are detected in ancient blood. Tutankhamun is no longer just a boy king. He is a fragile adolescent with bone disease, immune weakness, and a lineage burdened by centuries of divine isolation. Pathology versus myth. Legends collapse under microscopes. Violent deaths once assumed are reconsidered. Accidental injuries explain mysterious fractures. What was called murder becomes infection. What was blamed on curses becomes bacteria. Science does not diminish the pharaohs, it makes them real. Rewriting time itself. Radiocarbon dating reshuffles Egypt's chronology.
Reigns overlap, dynasties blur, long-accepted timelines fracture and reform. Egypt's past is no longer fixed, it is dynamic, constantly recalibrated. The chemistry of eternity. Chemical residue analysis reveals the secrets of mummification. Pine resins from distant forests, bitumen from the Dead Sea, oils, waxes, aromatics, carefully chosen not just to preserve flesh, but to sanctify it. Mummification was chemistry in service of belief, a science of the afterlife. Digital resurrection. Faded hieroglyphs invisible to the naked eye reappear through digital epigraphy. Laser scans map temples millimeter by millimeter. AI reconstructs missing reliefs. Satellites detect anomalies beneath desert sands, possible tombs still sealed. Egypt is no longer excavated only with shovels, it is decoded with algorithms. A discipline without boundaries. Modern archaeology is no longer solitary. It is collaborative. Historians work alongside radiologists. Chemists advise Egyptologists. Engineers stabilize monuments. Data scientists model ancient cities. The ancient dead demand modern teams. The ethical question. But progress brings unease. Should mummies remain in museums, displayed behind glass? Should the dead be returned to the ground? Who owns the past? The nation, the descendants, or humanity? Does scientific curiosity justify eternal exposure? The pharaohs, once worshipped, are now debated. Who speaks for the ancient world? Western museums, modern Egyptian authorities, global audiences, each claims stewardship, yet the dead cannot consent. And still, they are studied. Why they endure. The pharaohs endure because they stand where all human questions meet: power and faith, art and science, mortality and memory. Their monuments still greet the Nile's sunrise, their names still echo in stone corridors, their faces return, pixel by pixel, on glowing screens. Eternity reflected. In the gold of Tutankhamun's mask, we see more than ancient splendor. We see ourselves, our hunger to remember, our refusal to let the past die, our dream of eternity. Egypt does not merely belong to history, it belongs to the human imagination.
Like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to stay updated on ancient historical events.